Hello and welcome to the May 1st episode of APHA's 15 on COVID-19 series. I'm your host, Dan Zlott, Vice President of Education here at APHA. Today we're going to be talking about vitamin C. This is probably the second most requested topic that we've received through the email, and it's second only to zinc, interestingly enough. And I think that's because pharmacists on the front lines are getting so many questions about things that people can do to help keep themselves healthy, minimize their chances of contracting COVID-19, or if they happen to get it, what they can do to minimize their chances of becoming, severely ill. And so, it just kind of reflects our world these days. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. As usual, I have nothing to disclose. Here are your learning objectives for today. Well, I thought we'd walk through vitamin C the same way we walked through the information about zinc. So just as before, I've been doing PubMed searches and Embase searches, but for today's episode, we'll take a look at PubMed and looked for vitamin C and COVID-19. This information is accurate as of yesterday, April 30th. So let's go ahead and take a look. So when you do that search, you come up with 7 results. So let's go ahead and start walking through each of the results, and I'll describe them at a high level, and then we'll arrive at our bottom line conclusion. All right, well, let's take a look at the first of our 7 studies. So this is a study looking at the impact of nutrition in general on the immune system and what specific nutrients one needs to consume in order to have a well-functioning immune system. And so when we dive into this particular article, there's a lot of very general discussion about immune function. And when specifically we narrow down to vitamin C, the only specific information that's there about the function of vitamin C with regard to immune function is related to the claims that the authors make about vitamin C's ability to support epithelial barrier function, growth and function of innate and adaptive immune cells, white blood cell migration to infection sites, and phagocytosis and microbial cell killing, and then antibody production. Now, the authors base that information off of a reference specifically looking at vitamin C and some of the more detailed aspects of immune function. And all of the information from that reference is entirely in vitro data, so there's no in vivo data. And on top of that, there is no information about the impact of vitamin C on infectious disease and the ability to limit the progress of infectious diseases in general, much less specifically when we're interested in the impact of vitamin C on COVID-19. So there is no information whatsoever in this paper about COVID-19. And so with regard to helping us answer the question of whether vitamin C has any utility or efficacy in COVID-19 disease, unfortunately, this paper really doesn't shed any light on that particular question for us. So our second study, when I first read the title, I was very interested. I thought perhaps this would be a case report and it would be something interesting to look at. It turns out that this is mostly hypothesis. So this particular article talks about some of the aspects of severe COVID-19 disease that we've discussed in previous episodes, some of the pro-inflammatory cytokines that are released, some of the acute lung injury and other things caused by an overly potent immune response. And then it goes on to talk about how vitamin C may help quell some of those responses. And they're basing this on various meta-analyses that have demonstrated potentially some benefit in ICU patients, either in terms of reducing length of stay, reducing the severity of pneumonias, potentially decreasing the oxidative stress in acute lung injury, things of that nature. And so the caveat to that is that if you take the time to read all those papers, there are some methodological flaws with all of the papers they're using as references to support their claims, which unfortunately we don't have time to get into today. However, even with that, they're making extrapolations based on other diseases that may have some relationship to COVID-19, sepsis being probably the closest example, pneumonia being another close example, but they're not exactly the same. And so we don't have enough information from this paper, and they don't talk about specifically any results in COVID-19 patients, or even SARS patients, so if we really wanted to make a closer extrapolation. So in conclusion, in their paper, they basically say that vitamin C or high-dose vitamin C is very well tolerated. There's essentially no side effects according to the authors. And so since it's available, people should consider it. And of course, they add in that we should do some clinical trials. So again, some interesting hypotheses there. Definitely something that should be looked into based on some of the data that they show. But there's no evidence in COVID-19, not even a case report in COVID-19. So unfortunately, this particular paper is in that same boat of interesting hypotheses, some interesting extrapolations that have generated some additional interesting hypotheses, but nothing that really helps us answer the question of whether or not vitamin C has any efficacy when it comes to COVID-19. All right, so with that now, let's go ahead and take a look at the third article on our list. So this article is somewhat similar to the second article. When I read the title, I thought we might perhaps see a case report, and instead it's really just more hypotheses and some interesting recommendations. So I thought it would be helpful maybe to read directly from the abstract and help summarize maybe where these particular authors are coming from. So they say, in this document, we review 2 simple adjuvant therapies to administer without side effects and low cost that could be useful for treatment of acute severe coronavirus infection associated with SARS-CoV-2. Vitamin C, a potential antioxidant, has emerged as a relevant therapy due to its potential benefits when administered intravenously. The potential effect of vitamin C in reducing inflammation in lungs could play a key role in lung injury caused by coronavirus infection. They go on then to talk about ozone and its potential benefit there, and they conclude their abstract with, nevertheless, our goal is not to make an exhaustive review of these therapies, but to spread the beneficial effects themselves. Obviously, clinical trials are necessary, but due to the potential benefit of these 2 therapies, we highly recommend to add to the therapeutic arsenal. So that really sums up the gist of the article quite well. There's really no evidence to support the benefit of these therapies, but they're cheap, and according to the authors, again, they have no side effects, and so we should start using them. And so obviously that's not an approach that we would recommend, or that I would recommend. It's we need to see some data before we start throwing therapies at people. Even things that on the surface might seem like they could make sense, antioxidants in a high pro-inflammatory state, seems like it might make sense. But the thing is, we don't fully understand everything that's going on with the biology of COVID-19, the deep immunology of what's happening and the effects on cytokines. And so to just throw therapies at people just on the off chance that they work, sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures, but this isn't necessarily the approach that we want to take when we're talking about large-scale recommendations for therapies, and certainly when it comes to evaluating literature. So in terms of helping us, again, answer the question about whether or not vitamin C has any utility in COVID-19 disease, unfortunately, this particular paper really doesn't shed any light on the subject for us, and it doesn't really help us answer any questions that our patients may have for us either. So with that, let's go ahead now and move on to the fourth article. So our fourth article is a comprehensive literature review, and they evaluate a number of different potential therapies for COVID-19. And so when they get into the section on vitamin C, they again highlight some of the data that suggests that there may be some benefit to high-dose vitamin C in sepsis-induced acute respiratory distress syndrome. And again, I think that's based on some of the meta-analyses that we discussed during the last paper. During the second paper. And as I said, there's some methodological flaws with that. which again we don't have time to get into. However, they then go on to discuss some of the potential mechanisms whereby vitamin C is thought to provide protection against some of the adverse events or some of the severe complications of sepsis and acute respiratory distress syndrome. And so again, we don't have time to get into all of that in detail, but generally, as you might imagine, they're anti-inflammatory and they tend to downregulate pro-inflammatory cytokines. They inhibit the interaction between the immune system and local tissues, things of that nature. But again, all of this information is based on in vitro data, so there's no in vivo experience here. Again, no case reports that they found in the literature to suggest the benefit of vitamin C in COVID-19. One interesting thing they do talk about, and we'll talk about this in a future paper that we'll discuss on the next slide, they do mention that there is an interesting trial going on in China. It's a randomized trial to see if high-dose intravenous vitamin C has any impact on severe acute respiratory distress syndrome that is a complication of COVID-19. And they anticipate that the completion of this trial will take place sometime in September of this year. So may have to wait a while to answer the question, but someone is doing a properly controlled randomized trial. Well, at least I'm assuming it's randomized. We'll have to, it's properly controlled. We'll have to take a look at the trial design when the information comes out to see if that's the case. But that will help us get us closer to the answer of whether or not vitamin C really has any utility in COVID-19 disease. So there's our first 4 trials. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the last 3. All right, so our 5th trial, or rather a paper, is describing the trial that we just talked about on the previous slide. So this has a more in-depth description of the trial that will be taking place in China. So the trial officially kicked off in February of 2020, and again, the authors are hoping to complete the trial by September of 2020. And this particular paper gives a little more insight into the details of the trial. So in particular, the intervention that they're looking at is vitamin C given intravenously at a dose of 24 grams per day for a total of 7 days. So that's obviously quite a bit of vitamin C. And then it also talks a little bit about some of the outcomes that they're looking for. So they're looking at the requirement for mechanical ventilation, the necessity of vasopressor usage in these patients, organ failure scores, the length of ICU stays, as well as the 28-day mortality rates. So those will be the endpoints. It's not clear which one is the primary endpoint. They do describe that this will be a randomized control trial. It's not clear if this will be a placebo-controlled randomized trial, or if the controls will simply be patients who did not receive high-dose intravenous vitamin C. So certainly will be very useful for us in terms of determining the utility of vitamin C or the efficacy of vitamin C in COVID-19 disease. However, at the moment, the description of the trial doesn't help us answer the question. So we're still left wondering whether there's any efficacy of vitamin C. So with that, now let's go ahead and move on to our 6th paper. So our 6th paper, as you read the title, you may wonder, as I did, why this is coming up in a search for vitamin C. This paper is really interested in looking at vitamin D and how vitamin D supplementation may be beneficial for COVID-19. So what they talk about here is the fact that vitamin D may serve as a substance which can increase the production of glutathione, and then they hypothesize that the increased levels of glutathione may spare vitamin C, which they purport in this article to have antimicrobial properties. And so the reason it comes up in this search is because they added vitamin C as a keyword in their article. So this is really a red herring. It really does not discuss vitamin C directly at all, other than to say that vitamin D may spare vitamin C and increase the levels of vitamin C in tissues. So once again, unfortunately, no information for us about the utility of vitamin C in COVID-19 disease. So with that, now let's go ahead and move on to our 7th and final article. So this article is another article kind of taking a broad look at the management of severe pneumonias, and they start off talking about SARS, the original SARS, MERS, community-acquired pneumonia. And so they do a nice job of reviewing the available literature with regard to a number of these adjunctive therapies, not what we would consider main supportive therapies, but adjunctive therapies that might be thrown in, like COX-2 inhibitors, sirolimus, statins, immunotherapies, and vitamin C. And so they summarize the results of some of the trials that are out there that have potentially shown some benefit to vitamin C, and what they basically determine is that there were some methodological issues with some of the trials, and that there are ongoing trials which will help to answer this. So for the time being, they do not recommend the use of vitamin C or any of the other things that they're talking about in their article for the management of severe respiratory pneumonias or acute respiratory distress syndrome that result from severe pneumonias. So again, nice review of some of the available literature there relating to some of these other therapies, but they do not talk specifically about COVID-19. Again, there are no case reports of vitamin C in COVID-19 described in this particular article. And so the recommendation that they come up with is that we should not be thinking about the use of high-dose vitamin C in COVID-19 at the present time. So once again, another article that doesn't really help answer the question regarding efficacy of vitamin C in COVID-19. All right. Well, now that we have taken a look at the literature about vitamin C, let's talk about the bottom line, and I don't think you'll be surprised. So at present, there's no data either in vitro or in vivo that vitamin C inhibits the SARS-CoV-2 viral replication, that it prevents viral infection, or again, that it inhibits the ability of the virus to enter into cells. There's no information that vitamin C alleviates the clinical symptoms of COVID-19 or that it alters the disease course of COVID-19. Now that may change. As we discussed, there is a clinical trial in the works, and so when we get the results of that trial, we'll certainly have a better understanding of whether or not vitamin C has any utility. Do keep in mind that that trial is looking at very high dose intravenous vitamin C, and so even if that shows a positive result, that's probably not something that's appropriate for patients to self-administer. Certainly not something we would want to recommend to patients coming into our pharmacies. So the other bottom line point, and again, this is just continues our trend here on the 15 on COVID-19 series, is that we need more data. So as that data becomes available, we look forward to covering that. So that will wrap up today's 15 on COVID-19 episode, and we hope that you will join us for our Monday episode as we revisit remdesivir. So there has been some late breaking news. There's not one, but two randomized controlled trials that have come out with some results. One of them has the full paper that's available for us to review. The other one has a pretty solid abstract, at least giving us some of the statistical outcomes. And so we will take a look at that information and see what there is to learn about remdesivir. So we hope you'll join us on Monday for those updates. As always, if you have questions about COVID-19, please send them our way, covid@aphanet.org. We continue to get great questions, and we are really enjoying being able to answer them for you. So please keep them coming, and we will continue to answer them as soon as we have some information to share. So with that, thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on Monday.